Do you feel like it's been a decade since the last World Collider dropped? Do you want more in-depth reviews of the most powerful forces across the Rift? Are you deeply confused about this channel and everything I produce? Well, too bad for all of that. We're back, baby. Everything's back. And we're not reviewing just one faction, we're reviewing 3, and we're doing it all in 5 minutes. So buckle up, because I'm Family Man, and this is World Collider. Normally, this would be the part where we jump straight into a deep dive, breaking down a faction's lore, unit list, mechanics, and poking around at the numbers behind everything. But not this time. Look, we're closing in on 400 public factions on the IWC website, and I don't know how I'm supposed to pick just one, especially if this ends up being the only World Collider we do this year. So instead, I'm picking 3. 3 factions that meet a specific criteria. Number 1, they're a finished faction that would work in a standard game of If Worlds Collide. IWC is open source, it's for everyone, and there is no wrong way to play the game. But that said, there is a format that lots of people design around. So for the purpose of this episode, I'm only focusing on factions that would work in the most popular formats and with rules that I can decipher and explain. Number 2, they're doing something that I find interesting, and the rules tell a story. I don't think everyone goes about it this way, but for me, it's always the lore that draws me in and the mechanics that keep me invested. I want to highlight factions that have an apparent and thematic game plan and unit list that is both sufficient but not so large that I can't easily make sense of it. I'm talking about factions that have between 6 to 12 units and strong design choices. Number 3, they're not on the first page of the faction tab. This means the average player would have to push past at least 100 other factions in order to find them. How often would that normally happen? Probably never. I mean, how often are you checking out page 2 of Google results? There's some really good factions that aren't on the homepage, and they deserve some love, so let's give it to them. Also, I'm not giving up the 5-minute format, so instead of doing 3 deep dive reviews, we'll just keep things surface level. We'll talk about what the factions are doing right, what I really love about them, and what they could improve on to be more playable, especially for people who are just starting to play. Let's crack on. First up, the Cactaean Desperados. These feisty flora are billed as very evil by their creator, Druid of the Eastfield, and other than that, what you see is what you get, but honestly, I don't need to see much more. They're wonky, they're playful, they're cactus cowpokes who use the battle cry, pokey pokey. They're not shy about who they are, and I love it. With a pair of likes, the Desperados are currently sitting on page 3, but despite that, they've got some really strong features. Let's talk about what they're doing right. The faction is entirely playable, with a few ambiguities that could be worked out at the table, and features 7 units with prices between 10 and 200 points. This means every unit is a practical pick for most standard formats which have budgets between 3 and 400 points. Additionally, every unit shares a consistent, interesting theme, the Thorns ability, which acts as a damage return for incoming melee attacks based on the Thorn value. This theme is reinforced by the Thorns Explosion tactic, which allows activated units to give up the ability for an immediate AoE within 3 steps. Right off the bat, I know what this faction is about, and I know what they want me to do when I get to the table. They're cactus cowboys, they shoot, they ride horses, they hurt to touch, and because the concept is a bit silly, they probably have some silly tools. And oh yeah, look at that, they do. It's the big jump, and Ace in the Hole are going to let me take big chances to do silly stuff. Sounds great. Alright, so what could the Desperados do to be more polished? Right now, the details we have about the Cactaeans are pretty sparse, and it's up to the viewer to decide if they're cheeky or if they're just another meme faction. I'd love to see a little more meat on those bones to convince new players that yeah, this is a real faction, and it's okay to become invested in them. Also, I think the numbers could use some retooling. Right now, they're in an awkward zone of low damage and middling cost. Having a 12-point damage return on your 40-point fast attack unit is a serious investment, but having it on a unit that only has 5 hit points is a bit of a trap. I'd love to see Druid decide what Thorns is really for, and then invest in it with confidence. Maybe that means the Desperados get a bit slower and a bit tankier, or maybe it means that Thorns do more damage but involve a knack roll. Either way, taking them in a numerically sound direction would be a huge boon to the faction's playability. I really want to see these spiky boys at the table more often. Faction number 2, the Kin of the Nephilim. Designed by True Reality, these elite giants of the underworld may not be as popular as True's Bonewind tribes or Union Yangs, but they still have a lot to offer. Nestled on page 2, the vibes here are reminiscent of Sons of Behemoth from AOS. Warmongering giants return from lost ages, enslave men, and sow chaos. All the good stuff. But on closer inspection of their tools and tactics, it becomes clear that the Kin are really doing their own thing, and that's what I want to focus on, because it is very cool. True is a veteran IWC creator, so they certainly know how to craft a faction that's going to work with the most popular formats. That said, True designs with a more old-school motif which may not always sync up one-to-one with the style of other factions. Love it or hate it, True's design is on point with the Nephilim. It's smart, it's effective, it takes full advantage of this edition's point equation, and I am all about it. Look at these big beefy boys. True's use of large size, near universal lone wolf, and melee-only range keeps cost extremely reasonable. This faction really takes advantage of the unit design math. I'm not sure if it's cheesy, but if it is, it's good cheese. Cheddar cheese? Whatever. It's great. On top of that, other clever choices include having weakling slaves, function similar to Warhammer's OBSEC, but since they're chaff units, it also encourages interesting mid-match decision making. And throw the weakling, which requires a tricky roll for a potentially big payout that is a fun and interesting way to again address a well-known flaw in the low attack and high damage archetype. So what could the kin use to gain some mass appeal? For starters, they could really use some editing and updating for the current rule set. There are some small anomalies that could cause some big discussions at the table, slowing the game down. Adding some range requirements to abilities and clarifying order of operations for others will add a great deal of user-friendliness to the faction. Related to this, the kin would really benefit from some playtesting and balancing. The faction is very close to being fully polished, but there are small things that would keep me from recommending it as a starting place for new players. Spending time at the table with this faction would likely reveal some hurdles that, if ironed out now, would lead to an overwhelmingly positive experience for someone just coming into the game. Now for the last entry, the Blooded. Another page 2 faction, the Blooded were created by Unhappy Cupcake, who has made a half dozen other factions. In my opinion, this one is absolutely their crown jewel. The lore is, all considered, a bit table stakes for IWC. An apocalypse has left the world barren, but as luck would have it, these guys love roaming a good wasteland and killing everything they find. For tabletop wargaming, bloodthirsty war tribes are a tale as old as time. You've got the gore grinders from Malagast, you've got the corpse grinder cult from Necromunda, hell, you've got the entire genre of dieselpunk. It's a well-known trope because it works. The lore is simple, but potent. So what else are the Blooded doing right? In my opinion, a whole lot. This faction shows how less really is more. It's like a haiku. Minimal information gives you maximum flavor that you can use your imagination to build upon. With sparse but focused detail, the Blooded managed to communicate a clear playstyle, offer tools to support their game plan, and feature 6 units with distinct roles that are ready to soak up those thematic buffs. On top of all that, there's even a star unit that I am legitimately jealous of. Look at this monster. The Zog Goliath has the smart combination of devastating plus counterattack strapped to a 20 hit point frame with 4 attacks that all have bypassing, all for 50 points. I'm still theory crafting all the ways I could gum up a battlefield simply by having this Chad stand still. Everything is clean, everything is clear, it all works, and it's easy for someone to pick up and start playing. In truth, I want to pick up and start playing these guys. So then what's left to improve here? Honestly, I just want more. The lore is brief, and right now none of the units have descriptions. Also, 6 units is pretty slim, even by my standards. I could see there being room for another 2 or 3 distinct units to round out the faction, but that's just my personal wish list. Finally, as with most factions that haven't made it to page 1, the Blooded could stand for some time at the table to make sure their kit is balanced. I think Prolong the Violence and Celebrate Death are balanced for this faction, but it's definitely right on the edge. Maybe you could be the one to take them out for a spin and find out. Think I'm right? Think I'm wrong? Head over to the If Worlds Collide Discord and decide for yourself. Links to the IWC Discord and the faction pages are all below. I've given all 3 factions a like, and I hope you do the same. I'm Family Man, and I'll see you next time Worlds Collide.